So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Alan Parker. He's the president and founder of the Justice Foundation. He has served as the president of the Justice Foundation, formerly the Texas Justice Foundation, since 1993, when it was founded to protect the fundamental freedoms and rights essential to the preservation of American society. Under his leadership, the foundation has represented clients free of charge in cases of limited government, private property, free markets, parental school choice, parental rights and education, and enforcing laws to protect women's health. Mr. Parker served as the lead legal counsel for Norma McCorvey, who was Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, and Sandra Cano, who was Mary Doe of Doe versus Bolton, in the legal efforts to overturn the landmark Supreme Court ruling that brought legalized abortion in demand to America. He is currently the co-host of a television program, Faces of Abortion. He is a frequent speaker on Roe versus Wade and on the harm caused by women, harm to women by abortion. Mr. Parker is a former professor of law at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, where he taught law, education law, and civil procedure. He was a visiting professor at the University of Texas and studied international human rights and international human rights at the Human Rights Institute in Strasbourg, France. He taught international human rights at the St. Mary's Institute on World Legal Problems in Innsbruck, Austria in 1992. He was elected as a hero for children by the Texas Board of Education in 2000 for his work in education. He is the author of numerous works on parental school choice and a frequent lecturer on legal topics including judiciary, education, and abortion. He and the Justice Foundation were selected in 1996 by the Texas Board of Education to evaluate the Texas Open Enrollment Charter Program. Prior to teaching, Mr. Parker was the general civil practice law as a trial lawyer. He was board certified in civil trial 1997 through 1992, and personal injury trial law 1998 through 1993 by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. Mr. Parker received his JD degree with high honors from the University of Texas Law in 1979. He was an associate editor of the Texas Law Review, a chancellor of the Order of Cope and Order of Barristers for his outstanding advocacy skills. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Oklahoma with a BA in economics in 1974, and today he's joined by his wife, Susan. Please stand with me and welcome to the podium, Mr. Alan Parker.
Thank you all. Thank you very, very much. I'm glad. I wish my mother could have heard that introduction, but I'm glad my Father in heaven could hear it, and I hope he's pleased. Please be seated. Thank you all very, very much. It's a great, great honor for me to be here today, and because I think this is such an incredible church. It's not the first time I've been here, obviously, and I appreciate all that you all do to provide leadership to San Antonio and leadership for the cause of Jesus Christ. And I was going to say, Laura, if you have extra time, you ought to go see the Wailing Wall replica out here, and the Hebraic roots of this church are very, very interesting and powerful, and emphasis on understanding our Judeo-Christian heritage, and that aspect is very strong here. I also am pleased to be here with Peter Anothra, who is an emerging statewide leader in school choice. Amen. He's taken on quite a role here in San Antonio, and he also meets with our statewide coalition in Austin at our meetings. And I believe you're going to hear some great, exciting announcements that are being led by Peter and other people here in San Antonio. But I think we're going to really see the creation of a statewide organization focused solely on school choice coming out of this city and this leadership. So that's something to be praying for quite a bit, all right? And on 17 July, here in San Antonio, we're going to have another citywide Black, White, and Brown conference hosted by Faith Outreach, and they're bringing in a out-of-state expert on school choice to talk about how do we get school choice in Texas. Today, we're going to just be a little bit more basic than that. What is school choice? What would it look like? And you all can decide, is this something I'm for or against? But if you decide you want to get involved, 17 July, right here in San Antonio at Faith Outreach from 10 to 3 would be kind of the next big opportunity to really get involved. So I wanted to be sure and mention that to you. But let me go ahead and just say a prayer if I could. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time we have to be together. I pray for the presence of your Holy Spirit. Pray that you'll be the teacher and leader of this whole movement, Lord. Father, we lift up the children of Texas to you. You said, suffer the little children to come unto me, Lord. And there are those who are blocking the children from coming to you and learning about you. And our enemy in the spiritual realm would destroy children, kill, steal, and destroy. Father, we ask you to bind the enemy in the spiritual realm, bless our human opponents, and give them salvation, Lord, and let them know you as their Savior. But Father, we just pray for release. Bind the power of the enemy and release the children to come to Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay, I'm going to be talking about real equity and educational freedom today through school choice. If we can put up my slides there and get my old picture when I was younger off the screen. That was not too bad, I hope. And so we're going to talk about real equity. What is equity in education? What is fair in education? You're going to find that I'm an advocate for school choice for all children. I believe the government should support the education with tax dollars that parents pay for the education of all children, not just some children. And one of the things you're going to find about our position, we are the ones for the education of all children, not those who would only support education of children in public schools. I support education wherever the parents want to take them. I'm not an opponent of public education. I'm not an advocate of just private schools. I'm for the best school for that child at that stage of the child's life according to the parent who knows them best decision. That's what we want, okay? And I'm actually kind of a product of that in a sense. I was raised in both Catholic schools and public schools. When I grew up, I had my youngest daughter in the Jewish community school at one point. You know, preschool was one of the best in the community. It was close to home. We loved it. We loved her learning about Jewish culture. And then at various times, we have both had them in private school and public school and homeschool. So again, we did what was best for our child. We took our child out of a private school once that I won't name because she went through a rebellious phase. She found the other rebellious kids, and we had to put her in public school to straighten her out. Now, you might not think that overall, right? But she got into a program that had some special requirements. She had to toe the line, and she wanted to be in it, and it was good for her. All right? So, again, what's best for my child at this phase of that child's life is what's important, okay? So we want real educational freedom. School choice means the dollars follow the child to the school of the parent's choice. Another concept is child-centered funding. Instead of funding districts, we are going to fund the education of all children. And then you decide where you go, and the money follows the child. If a school attracts a lot of students, it needs a lot of money, it'll have a lot of money. If it's something that's only for a small group of specialized students, it won't have as much money. Or if it does a poor job and students start leaving, it'll lose money gradually, which gives that institution the opportunity to respond to consumer complaints. Well, why are you leaving? My child does not feel safe here. My child is bullied. The gangs are trying to get my daughter. Well, instead of having a statewide program against bullying, that school has to figure out, how do we stop bullying at this school? And it may include doing something like a Philadelphia school, where if you don't have enough, do you hire one guy with a gun? Or do you get 35 dads to come in with shirts that say, Dads on Patrol? Big men can often calm down a situation. I hate to say that, not being sexist. You could maybe have moms on patrol too, because moms know how to handle things. So, I'm not saying that's it. I'm just saying that's one solution that a school in Philadelphia did when it got out of hand. Okay? But the difference with choice is that school responds. We don't then implement some program to respond to bullying at a school that doesn't have a bullying problem, which is what you have to do when the state mandates to fix some problem somewhere. And if you've ever been in public education, you know this is kind of what it does. You don't necessarily focus on the problem you've got. You focus on the problem that the people at the top tell you to focus on. Because the current system of public education is a government-controlled, top-down monopoly. Okay? And where you go to school is primarily determined by where you live, right? Why is that the most important decision or factor in where your child ought to go to school? It shouldn't be, and it doesn't have to be. So we want to go on to the next slide. Education reform through private school choice. It is sweeping the nation. And we often call it public-private choice. If you just say school choice, some people will be, well, I'm for public school choice. And we are too. I like programs that give you more choice in public schools. But that's not enough, because it's still within the closed system monopoly. And it gives you some choice, but why limit choice? All right? And there's 40 different private school choice programs now in place across the country. Okay? But none of those are in Texas. There's really no way for public funding to follow the child to a private school in Texas at this time. And we think that's time to change, okay? Now, we do have some kinds of choice in Texas. We have something called charter schools. In fact, charter schools came about because of the school choice movement. It was not a public school desired thing, and they still kind of don't like charter schools. Just attended a meeting in San Antonio trying to bring peace between the two. And whenever I say anything about public education, I'm not an opponent of public education. If there's a good public school and it's best for your child, that's okay. But, if you do put a child in a public school from a Christian perspective, then you have to be particularly careful to monitor the spiritual development of your child. Okay? And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. But, not everybody's a Christian. Anyway, we have charter schools. A charter school is a public school. By statute, it says it's a public school. Therefore, it cannot teach religion. Okay? That's the basic fundamental aspect of a charter school. It is a public school, so it can't teach religion. Now, some of them are teaching what you might call Christian values. Maybe they have a character program, but they can't be very explicit about there is a God who created you in his own image, who loves you so much, he sent his only son, Jesus, to die for you. He created the world. You're not a product of slime. You're not an animal. Don't act like one. Okay? And so they just can't do it. It's not because they're evil people. That's the way the law is, all right? And I'm really talking about systems today, okay? There are heroes in the public education system. Thank God there are. There are missionaries in the public school system. But by law, by Supreme Court ruling, it is a godless system. It rejects God. In 1962, the Supreme Court said, we are not going to allow any prayer or any acknowledgement of the God who created America and blessed us in our founding. That is just the reality. Again, and if you're a teacher in that system, you can do the best you can, but you're in a system that is against God. that's chosen to break that covenant. All right? But there are charters, and there are about 100,000 children in the state of Texas on waiting lists to get into charter schools. That means their public school is so unable to meet the perceived needs of the parent and the students that their parents are wanting them in another school. And the school is so good, it's full up, and they have a waiting list. That's pretty amazing, all right? And that shows you the problem is we have a lack of supply of good schools. There are some. I'm not saying every public school is bad. But by federal standards, when they tested all the students in Texas, 50% of the campuses in this state are failing to meet adequate yearly progress goals. Adequate yearly progress means if you start second grade, by the end of second grade, you should be at about third grade level. You know, you should advance a year. I read the little book, now I'm reading the big book. There should be more math at the end of a year of school. Reading, writing, math. We just measure the basics, and half the campuses in the state of Texas are failing our children. That has to be known and amplified, and you better be careful if you have your child in a public school because they're getting good grades. We have grade inflation in Texas because nobody likes to tell parents they're failing. And schools don't like to be told they're failing because then you got to do something about it. In fact, one of the greatest problems we've had is just getting things measured in public school. Again, right now it's a little controversial in a sense. Some will say, oh, we test too much. We've gone overboard in Texas, perhaps. But if you do not measure reading, writing, and math, then you don't know how you're doing. And we had a problem even measuring it. And we would just pass students along from grade to grade and grade. And then when they get out and need a job, they can't read. They can't talk right. They can't research or think. And so it's a serious problem. So I am an advocate for measuring results. But you should never teach to the test. Teach 3 grades above the test. Then everybody will pass. You know? Don't teach to the test. So anyway, and no one requires the public schools to teach to the test. They just require them to measure reading, writing, and math. Okay? And that, to me, should continue. We also have public education grant program. If you go to a low-performing public school, you can apply to a different school, but it's up to that school to decide whether they want to take you or not. And there are some students who are able to get into that, but most of the public schools say, we don't want you. And then there are some intra-district choice programs, campus charters, magnet schools you've heard of. You can get some choice in a public school, and you ought to look into that. If your current public school is not good for your child, see if there's another school that you can go to. All right, so let's go forward to the next slide. Texas is behind these curve. I'm not going to go over these, but 23 different states have now adopted some form of private school choice program where you can choose a private school and money will follow you to that school. Texas has 0 along these lines. I think part of the problem may be that we're so big. Some of these are smaller states. But we have not had, and the other thing we have not had, a governor who was committed to the hard political task of achieving school choice. Why don't we have it? Because the education establishment that has a monopoly does not want to give it up. Most human beings would not. It is just human nature. If you have a system that guarantees you a paycheck, whether you do a good job or a bad job, who wants to give it up? Who wants competition? Because somebody might do it better than me, and then people would go there. And I'd have to change what I'm doing. And change is difficult and hard. And this is one reason we don't get constant improvement in public schools and why half of them are failing, and half of them will fail next year. Because there's no pressure to do the hard work that change requires. But choice provides constant upward, gentle pressure to improve. Okay? It's not super hard or harsh, but if you look at just restaurants, bad restaurants tend to go out of business. Not because somebody shuts them down necessarily, but because everybody says, well, gosh, this one's nicer, cleaner, and better tasting. I'm going there. You know, and food is more important than education, but we let people make choices. You know, the same way even with technical things like iPhones. They get better all the time. I have no idea how an iPhone works. You know, do most of you really? No. It's like a parent doesn't have to know what a good school should be like. They can just tell what works. And schools could compete on saying, well, here's where our test scores are. And you know what works? Hard work. And we're a school that will require your child to do hard work. Now, is this where you want your child to be? Because we're going to need your support as a parent to make sure they do their homework and sure they're at school. You know, you can allow those kinds of things. So we need to move forward, all right? All right. I need to move forward. All right. What's my next slide? Wouldn't it be great if every parent in the state of Texas had the ability to choose the best school to meet the needs of their individual children? It would be great, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great if parents of faith had the ability to choose a school which doesn't undermine their values in their family? All right. And I really do want to emphasize this today. I don't always mention this in my school choice speeches because the government has to be interested in school choice for a secular purpose. The secular purpose of school choice is to increase educational achievement. That's a legitimate government function. It is not a legitimate government function to advance a particular religion. There shall be no establishment of religion by the government. However, our Constitution also says the government shall not prohibit the free exercise of your religion. So you are free to say, I want my child educated in my religion and what I believe. The basic secular subjects have to be taught, but you can teach biology and say there's a God who created everything in this life. So the Supreme Court of the United States, Zelman v. Harris, has already said, as long as it's a general program available to everyone, the fact that a parent chooses to go to a religious school is the exercise of religious liberty, not the establishment of religion. No one is forced to go to a religious school. And I believe we're entering what might be the third wave of American education. The first wave was definitely Christian Protestant education in this marriage. The dominant religious schools. They were created. We created the schools to teach the Bible. Our founder said you got to be literate so you know the most important book in the world, the Bible. It wasn't to get a job, it was to know God and to know His will. That's what education is for. Then, in 1908, Texas atheists sued and wanted hymn singing and prayers and Bible reading out of the Texas public schools. And the Supreme Court in Church v. Bullock said, no. Shall we starve the moral and spiritual nature of the many out of deference to the few who object? They answered, no. The result would be moral chaos and anarchy. Right? In 1962, the U.S. Supreme Court was faced with the same question. Shall we remove Bible singing, hymns, and prayer from the public schools? And the Supreme Court said, yes, we will. Out of deference to the few who object, we will ignore the needs of the majority. And the result has been moral chaos and anarchy. Right? So now the third way would be, okay, we won't have government religious schools. We won't have government secularist schools that you're forced to go to by law, but we'll fund everybody's education, and you can decide what kind of school you want. You want a secular humanist school? Go. You want a know God school? Fine. You want a school that's Catholic, Baptist, Christian, whatever? You can do it. And that's religious liberty. And we have to support even the right of people whose religion we don't agree with to send children to their school. And then when children get to be adults, they make their own decisions. All right? So that's one of the things we're doing. And I believe when we say transforming society, folks, we need repentance and revival, or this nation is doomed. We need repentance and revival, or this nation is doomed. And we may very well be in the end times. And I think we are, but I don't know when for sure. Nobody knows the hour of the day. But we have got to be bringing children into the life, stopping the shedding of innocent blood, and then educating them the right way. If you're a parent, I urge you to consider private school or homeschool and fighting for school choice, because you've got to have the money. All right, what about safe alternatives? We have hundreds of thousands of children in Texas who are afraid to go to school, but we force them by law to go to that school that won't protect them. And competition would protect public schools. All right, let's go ahead all the way to the taxpayer savings grant program. I'm going to explain this one. We're going to talk about two types today. Taxpayer savings grants are in the broad category, sometimes called a voucher program or a grant program. You get the money more directly through this type of program. And in the taxpayer savings grants, it was introduced by Donna Campbell, who is our state senator from here in San Antonio. She was the champion. And here's how it works, okay? It's a totally voluntary program. And the dollars follow the child. So if you want, like the public school you're in, you don't have to choose. Nobody loses anything. This is an addition. You get your public school choice, and now you have private school choice. Dollars would follow the child, 60% of average maintenance and operation expenditure, about $5,000 per child. That would save the state about $3,000 per child, and there'd be no new regulations on private schools. The law specifically says private schools that accept students have to comply with no more regulations than are in effect on private schools now. Some people think they're not regulated at all, but the state does require teaching in the 5 common subjects, okay? If you'll go back, I think that's kind of at the end, isn't it? I think after the wouldn't be great, there's some explicit language on there that I want to show people. Funding follows the child on the slide. Ours is basically a 12-year phase-in program. To be eligible, you have to either be starting kindergarten or first grade or have been in public school the year before. And part of the reason for that is if we paid suddenly for every private school student in the state, it would be about an extra $1.5 billion. And in the past, we haven't had that money. Now, this year, we are going to have a surplus. And if there was enough outcry from parents, the state could pay for everybody all at once. But our bill has it phased in kind of over 12 years, like you do when you're in new school, so that if you put your child into kindergarten, they're eligible for the next 12 years. And you know how sometimes you start a school with a K through 12, or K, and then first grade, second grade, third grade, each year you add a grade. That's kind of what our law does. And the reason that we say it's about 60% of average maintenance and operation. That's what M&O stands for. It's about a $5,000 scholarship or grant, all right? That saves the state about $3,000 a child. That would save the state $2 billion a year. So it is designed as a taxpayer savings. And if you think about it, it's like this. Okay, you're entitled to a free public education, which spends about $11,000 per student. That's how much the public schools spend. Well, if somebody's willing to go and take less, that saves us money and gives them freedom. And that's part of the theory of this bill. If I voluntarily take less, I can go to the school of my choice, all right? But school choice could, that's what the taxpayer savings grant did, all right? All right. And then forward a couple of pages to no new regulations. Private schools that parents voluntarily choose to attend with or without governmental assistance will not be required to comply with any state law or regulation governing its educational program that was not in effect on January 1st, 2013. That was last year's bill. We'll change it to 2015. In other words, whatever the laws are now that private schools have to comply with, that's all they have to do. Because one of the big issues is, if you take government money, will it come with strings? First of all, no money's going directly to the school. It's a parent reimbursement plan, though it is possible that the parents could then assign that to the school and the checks would be sent to the school after the parents and the school sign a something under penalty of perjury. It says, my daughter attended New Life Christian Center during the month of September, send the check to her. Could be done that way. So basically what it is, the money follows the child of the parent's choice, not the schools. What we currently do right now is we fund schools, right? And you can see the fight that gets into. But this is just funding the education of all children. If you go to a public school, you get a little bit more money under this plan. And but if you go to a private school, you don't get as much, but you get the choice. All right. So I'll stop with that. I will say there's a real movement in Texas now to get school choice, and I want to urge you to get involved. In 2012, on the Republican primary, the voters were asked, should we stop funding the bureaucracy and start funding the education of children with the money to follow the child to the school of the parent's choice, either public, private, or parochial, with a savings to the state? And 85% of the people in the primary said yes. Over 1 million Texans said yes. It wasn't on the Democratic primary ballot, but when you poll Democratic voters, they support school choice by majorities. Varies from 60 to 70%, depending on how you ask the question. But they support it too. So the people of Texas want it. The educational establishment is totally opposed to it. And so that's whose opposition has to be overcome. And they're very well organized. They're very intent. It's their livelihood. Parents think it's a good idea, but in the last session of the legislature, I was talking with the lieutenant governor. He's saying, they're killing us. Where's the people? Everybody's against it. And I said, well, remember who voted for it. But their families, they're at work. They don't have lobbyists to come up here in the middle of the session and fight for this. You've got to fight for them. But you may need to get more organized to have a voice in Austin. If that's where the decision is going to be made. It's up to you. This is a leadership institute. You have to decide what you're going to do. So that's the conclusion of I'll turn it over for Ms. Colangelo. And then we'll have questions and answers at the end.
Thank you, Alan Parker. For many of you who may not know me, I'm Elder Anthony Jackson. I'm the principal of New Life Christian Academy. And before I bring up the next speaker, I want to say this. Alan, it's good to see you again. But I just came back from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was almost started laughing when you said the private schools aren't held to any kind of regulation. Because I spent 3.5 days on new regulations for private schools for our accreditation. And Alan, I brought you back something. I'm going to hold one for Elder Peter. I'm going to give him this to Elder Peter first. But Alan, I brought this back to you. While we were there, we had a whole day on school choice. And I brought back the 50-state survey and all of the school choice programs in all 50 states. And those are the booklets for each one. But what was unique is North Carolina this year, they passed school choice in North Carolina. And what happened was they had big family support because they had, like you said, one governor. And what his governor did is he did an extensive study on school choice. And what he found changed the entire debate. They found that in every state that had school choice, they studied the minority children. African Americans in school choice states, dropout rate dropped 42%. Dropout rate dropped 42% for every state that had a school choice. 42%. Hispanics, 39% dropped. Dropout rate. Graduation rates for African American males in every school choice state went up 39%. 28% for Hispanics. When he revealed this survey and they began to put it among the constituents, even members of the Democratic Party came on board. What they found out also was the school choice they passed in North Carolina gave teachers the opportunity, if they wanted to be able to pray in their school, they would then allow the teachers, now you didn't have to be stuck in a public school, they could go to a private school because the vouchers made their salaries comparable. So now the teachers had an opportunity to have choice. So it was amazing. This gentleman, he spoke, it was unbelievable because they looked at not only just the children, the parents, but they looked at the teachers. They said, you have teachers that would love to be in the school where they could pray, where they could exercise their faith. And this form of, it was in North Carolina, made it possible for students, parents, and teachers all to benefit. So there's something to it. There's something to the school choice movement. So I urge you, our children, the very last day we were there and they were talking about children that are coming from public schools coming to private schools, and we have an epidemic of kids cutting themselves. They're cutting. Several children this year was found dead in their bathrooms because they cut and bled to death at school. So they're saying, where are these kids going? If they, like you said, they're scared to go to school, where can they go? They're coming to private schools and they're teaching children in private schools how to cut themselves. So there's this moral decay in our society, what you were talking about, and anarchy. And the place to fix it is a school that teaches moral values. So not every person is going to want to come to a private school, but they're cutting, they're bullying. There's a crisis epidemic. We have to do something to change the climate and environment of our schools. It's not about public and private. It's about these kids that are dying. They're literally dying at public and private schools because of moral decay. And if we are parents and administrators and legislators and we don't stand up and do something about it, shame on us. Shame on us. It's not about, do I take money from public school or private school? It's about saving children. Children that are dying. And we sit back and all we want to do is fight and argue over red states and blue states? Shame on us. This is the first year, Elder Peter, I went to a school accreditation meeting, and I felt like I'm time for me to get out of education. I've had enough. I've had enough of this bickering and fighting and watching kids die. I'll take my child home and school him at my house. Because people sitting in buildings like this, we're selfish, and we don't really care about kids. So that was my soapbox for 2 minutes. But I want to tell you, I'm passionate about what I do, but I'm frustrated because we don't have the support that we should have. Alan Parker they fight in the courts. Laura's getting ready to come up and tell you about 800 private schools that she supports. But we need you sitting out there to get off those pews and start supporting children. These children are dying. They're killing themselves. Moral decay. They have no hope. And they're afraid to go to school. And many of them, if they're not being abused at school, they're being introduced to homosexuality and lesbianism. And some of them are in the showers and being assaulted. And where are our parents? Oh, that's enough for me. Okay. Well, our next speaker is Laura Colangelo. She's the executive director of Texas Private School Association. Laura originally was from Lexington, Kentucky. We'll forgive her for that. And graduated from Duke University. We'll forgive her for that. She got her master's degree in education before moving to Houston. So she's getting it right. to teach 1 year in public middle school. Then she transitioned to a private school where she taught upper school Spanish at Kincaid School. After her family moved to Austin, she's finally getting it right, Laura began to work on her doctorate in curriculum instruction at the University of Texas. I knew she would come along, okay? After staying home with her children for a few years, she became a head of Episcopal School in Austin and was thrilled to become the first full-time executive director of Texas Private School Association for 1 year. She is honored to represent over 800 private accredited nonprofit schools in Texas and in the legislature and in D.C. Would you welcome Laura Colangelo?
Thank you very much. Well, as they say, I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I can. I made my way here. Thank you for that nice introduction. I am very honored to represent the 828 private accredited nonprofit schools in Texas. And I know that because I put together the database myself, put in every single one. Most of them are religious. All different kinds of religions are represented in those private schools. And I have the privilege of traveling around the state and visiting many of these schools. And so I know the incredible work that goes on in these private schools, often on shoestring budgets. Many of them struggle to get by. But they do such important work, including this school here that I haven't had the chance to tour yet, but I want to, and see exactly what goes on in here. It must be a pretty incredible place. But I wanted to tell you a little bit. I don't have the preaching skills of the gentleman who came before me. I'm an educator, so I'm going to teach you a few things, and then when I'm finished, we're going to answer some questions. Like I said, 828 schools. We serve over 220,000 students in the state of Texas. 21,000 teachers. So there are a lot of people involved in private schools. They know how important it is to have a school of your choice. And I serve as the public voice for private schools in Texas, which means I am a registered lobbyist. I went over to the dark side. And I spend every couple days, I go to the Capitol. I live in Austin. I go to the Capitol, I park, and I walk around and I talk to people. And I tell them about our schools. And I tell them all the things they need to know, because it's shocking to me how little people understand about private schools. They think they're all Catholic schools, or they're all Baptist schools, or they're charter schools or home schools. No. And so I have to start from the beginning. This is what a private school is. But it's fun, and I have great conversations. I was in Chairman Aycock's office the other day. He's the chairman of the House Public Ed Committee. Tell him everything he needed to know about private schools, and together we figured out that private schools save Texas $2 billion a year. People don't think of it that way. They think it's only rich people taking money, rich people, and not, they don't have to send their kids to public school, so they don't. It's not. It's a huge landscape. I call it a tapestry of schools. Just amazing. All different kinds of missions being fulfilled every day. The accreditation that was mentioned, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, just so you have an understanding of across Texas what accreditation is. There are 15 accrediting agencies recognized by the state of Texas. The Lutheran Commission, Baptist, Methodist, non-sectarian. There are 15 of those that the TEA recognizes. And those accreditation commissions make sure that each school has at least the minimum standard of what the state of Texas requires. So every private accredited school has to have the same minimum. Now, I'm talking minimum here, right? But there are people who claim that there are private schools that aren't as good as public schools. No. Accredited schools have to maintain minimum standards that public schools do. They also, all private schools, accredited private schools, have to take a norm reference test every year. And you'll hear that from people who are against school choice. Well, you don't have to have a test. Well, no, they don't have to take the STAR test, which is the test that public schools take that you hear so much about, that people hate. They don't have to, they choose not to take that test. They could if they thought it was a good test, but nobody takes it that I've heard of. So they take what's called norm reference tests that really actually give you data that helps you understand where the children are and where you can take them. The STAR test, and I won't get too technical, but it is a criterion reference test, which means someone in Austin decided what every single third grader should know, details and facts and figures, and then they test each child for that. Well, of course, you're going to teach that test. It's just this huge amount of information. Why don't you teach children how to think and be critical thinkers and love to learn? That's what a norm reference test is, and that's what private schools give. And there are lots of them. They're national, Stanford, Iowa. You've heard those names. Those are the kind of tests that private schools give. Now, I still haven't figured out why the state of Texas doesn't want to do that. I get different answers every time, but we're paying millions and millions of dollars to a company that makes the test, the STAR test, when there are national tests that could save us tons of money. But I'll get off that soapbox. But just so you understand, private schools are accountable. They also have to have audits every year to be an accredited private school, and you'll hear that from the opposition, that private schools aren't accountable. We don't know how they spend their money. Well, we don't have to open the books to everybody to look and see, but they do have to have an independent verified audit every year. So when you hear that, know that private schools are accountable financially also. So there are a couple of things that I talk about when I'm trolling the halls of the Capitol. The biggest 90% of my job is to keep regulation out of private schools. Because if you've been a part of a public school, you know that you are just saddled with enormous regulation. And if any of that seeps into the private school world, then I have not done my job. And private schools cease to be private schools once you allow some sort of regulation involved. So, for example, the last session before I had my job, there was a CPR curriculum that got somehow snuck out, and private schools were not exempt from being required to have a CPR curriculum. Now, CPR sounds pretty innocuous. Of course, people should know CPR, but that is a slippery slope. And once you open the door to a CPR curriculum, it could be any other kind of curriculum that they start to impose on private schools. So it actually got, in the implementation, they took that out and exempted private schools the way it should have had done in the beginning, but it was a wake-up call, and probably one of the reasons they decided to hire a full-time executive director to be in Austin to make sure to keep that kind of thing out. So that's what most of what my job is. Another issue before I get to the school choice legislation that I'm going to teach you about today is pre-K. And universal pre-K is a buzzword you're hearing a lot right now. And actually, here in San Antonio, you hear a lot about pre-K. Now, I am not here to argue one way or the other that universal pre-K is good or bad. But what I am here to argue is that anytime you expand people who are eligible for pre-K or add more families or get it into a new state, you have to maintain the diversity of pre-K options, meaning you have to preserve religious preschools. Because when you start, and it's hard to understand because it happens kind of slowly and insidiously, but when you start, these expansion of programs usually ends up being one particular kind of program, sort of a Head Start model, a center-based pre-K. When those are the programs that are funded, the religious preschools lose out and close down. And you end up having one kind of pre-K available to every child. And I don't think anybody wants that. If anybody knows a child, has been in a classroom for 1 minute, you know there is not one way that children learn. Every child is completely different. And so there has to be a wide array of pre-K options, the way there are today. Catholic preschools, there's a preschool here, as I understand, right? all different kinds. Montessori, Waldorf, those are really important pre-K options that we have to preserve. And so I'm talking to the governor's office quite a bit about that because there's a lot of talk about expanding pre-K, and I'm trying to help them understand. You can talk about expanding pre-K, but you need to absolutely make sure that you maintain the diversity of pre-K options. Don't just open more Head Start centers one after another. Give parents certificates and allow them to choose the preschool that they're going to. And that's the model that, that we hope will be maintained. We just lobbied our two senators, Cornyn and Cruz, to make sure they understood that because they're talking about expanding it on a national level. And so that's important to understand. So now to the choice legislation. TPSA, our board, is very supportive of what's called a tax credit scholarship program. And I've got a handout that you may have, or you could probably pick up later if you don't have it yet. But this is a program that combines a couple of things. Well, let me explain what it is first. Corporations can donate to a nonprofit scholarship fund. And the original intent was to have a lot of different community-based scholarship funds. So it could be a scholarship fund for Baptist schools, Lutheran schools, Catholic schools. And corporations can donate to that fund in exchange for a tax credit for their margins or franchise tax. And that's basically the only business tax that, that businesses pay in Texas. And there's some debate about that. People want to repeal it. I hear all kinds of things in the Capitol. But they donate to this nonprofit, and the nonprofit distributes scholarships to children in private schools. And it would be equivalent of about $4,500 a year, which some people argue that won't pay any private school tuition. But according to the surveys that we've done, 60% of private school tuition are $4,000 or $6,000 or below. So it can pay for most, if not all, of a private school tuition. And I know that some families can't pay $10,000, but they could pay $6,000, or can't pay $6,000, they could pay $2,000. It would help families get access to these incredible schools that I have the privilege of driving around and seeing. So that's the tax credit scholarship program. Now, the reason we support that more than the other, we support all choice. But I have to be really careful with my schools to pick the legislation that we think has the best chance of passing. There's less opposition. Even when I talk to people, to legislators that I can't imagine would have been supportive of this, when I explain this in detail, they sit back and say, oh, okay, well maybe. And these are people that have been school choice opponents. So we're trying to forge a path to victory here. So with these donations, their money never reaches state coffers, so there can't be regulations attached to it that some people say would come with public money, but it's not public money going to private schools. So our accreditation would remain our accountability as it is right now. I think that's, I'm gonna finish early, I think. Who's eligible for the scholarship? Well, it depends on which version of the bill we're talking about. The one that got out of the Senate committee last session, it was 250% of the federal poverty level. Now we would support a bill that had more of it, that wasn't as limited in the income eligibility. But we know that you have to start somewhere. And it's, this kind of program is the way to start a school choice movement. When people see what happens when families get access to the private schools that they couldn't afford to begin with, people understand how important it is, and why we need more school choice in Texas. Does that answer your question? But I think I get to open it up for Q&A here. Does anyone have a question? Yeah. Okay.
And while they're doing that, Pastor Peter Onofre asked me to remember at the end of this, we're going to have a survey of you all. And so we really want your reaction to what do you think about these concepts. I think it's going to ask which one do you like better or both or whatever. So you're our focus group. But this is the first time we've ever done that. So we're kind of getting a little feedback too. So just thought we'd do that this morning. Go ahead.
I just have a question about when you go to vote for this, it's going to be on the ballot, and usually they, when they have the things that you vote for on this for the schools, it's kind of hidden in there. So how are we going to know to recognize that this particular thing, if we get to ever vote on it, how are we going to get to recognize that?
Well, I think we'll both do this. I think this is good. First of all, I want to say it's a marvelous advance for school choice in Texas that we have Laura Colangelo working on this, and that the private schools hired an executive director to represent their interest in Austin. It really, really is. And it's a big advance. Before we wanted to stay away from government, but they end up regulating you anyway, like the CPR bill, she said, whether you get any money or not. They just like to regulate up there. This will not be on the ballot. In Texas, this will be a matter that the Texas legislature passes. We do not have initiative and referendum like some states. So for you to be directly involved, you have to speak to your legislator or elect the right people to office. We have a representative democracy. You need to look at your voter registration card, and 100% of you should be registered to vote. That's just a Christian duty. If you love your neighbor as yourself, then you want to care about the society you live in. So register to vote, and then through your church, you can find out who your representative is. Between now and November, find out how they stand on this issue, and then vote for the candidate of your choice. And so I'm saying this in a nonpartisan way. That's how the mechanism works. And then after November, between November and January, our groups will be meeting with those legislators to see who got elected. If people who don't like school choice get elected, we probably have no chance. If, on the other hand, people who like school choice and who say they're going to fight for it get elected, our chances are better. We'll be working with them what kind of bill gets passed. And that's all negotiation in the legislature.
Well, and let me just add to that. If you, www.whorepresentsme.org, you can find out who your representatives are. And now, the hard thing is it's a controversial issue. And so many candidates don't want to talk about school choice because there are a lot of teacher groups that fund a lot of candidates. So it's kind of hard to figure out where they land on it. So you might have to call them and ask them directly. Or on our website, we're going to try to have some advocacy and highlight at least the ones that we know are for it. We probably can't say who's against it, but if you look and see your representative's name on our website, you'll know that's a person who's for it.
And you should have received something from the Taxpayer Savings Grant one-page sheet. There is our website, Taxpayer Savings Grant. If you go to that website and sign up, you'll be on our email. We're going to do the same thing. We're doing a lot of this together, too. It's not competing groups, but it's good to be on it, both. And we'll tell you who voted for and against it. With candidates, you have to be a little careful. Are you for school choice? Yes. They'll all say that, but they may only be thinking public school choice only. So I would say, are you for school choice including private schools? Then whatever type it is, that basically puts them on the spot. Doesn't matter what kind of proposal. Do they want private schools included. That's the big issue. Very good question. Very good question. Yes, others?
All right. First of all, thank you for bringing this information to the church and everyone here. I have a question, and this is a question that, as I'm talking about this with peers and coworkers and different individuals, I have a hard time answering this, and so I'm going to elicit your help in helping me pose my solution or answer. When you talk about school of choice, and we look at whether both public and private, you look at, let's say, the schools in San Antonio, and you have Tier 1, great A-plus schools that are really teaching all the way down to maybe the Tier 4, and you allow people to spend their dollars anywhere where they want to go. Tier 1 schools get filled really fast, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, and then you have everyone else that couldn't get into those schools based on capacity, having to still go to a public school or even a Tier 3, 4, or something like that. Elder Jackson talked about the graduation rate of those that go to, most likely, I would assume, the Tier 1, 2, 3, you know, whatever that is. What happens in the private schools, right? And so it's a capacity issue that I can't answer. And then what happens to those individuals that don't make it into those top, let's just give them grades, right? A, B, maybe even C schools. What happens there? Because there's a percentage of students, whether it's 30%, 25%, whatever that percentage is, that don't make it up there. And so can you help me understand what that process is and what happens there? Because that's something I'm having a hard time answering.
So you're talking about private school access. Is that what you're saying? Or capacity?
Well, I think, yeah, so if you put every student in whatever city into a bucket, and you give them school of choice, whether it's private or public, obviously, in my opinion, the private school is going to fill up first, then it's the public. Whatever the A schools are, B schools, then C schools, and then everybody else is to fend for themselves in public. And I mean, even some of the private are maybe not as good as we would like them to be. And so how does that process work in your thoughts?
Well, there was a survey of private schools done, and we found that we have, I think, 35% more capacity. We can take 35% more children than we have right now. So there is room in private schools. Now, they're not ranked, you know, this Tier 1 kind of thing. They're all accredited in different ways, and they all have individual missions. So, I mean, it may be in your mind there's a top down, but there is no official ranking. And the idea is that parents go and choose the school, the mission, whatever it is about that school that they want for their child. And there should be capacity, especially at the beginning of this movement. We're talking about, you know, it would probably start, and I can't remember the exact number from the last legislative session, but it just 0.00 something % of the public school budget. I mean, it's not going to be this huge amount, this huge influx of students to begin with. The idea is everyone gets used to the idea, they see the success, and it grows from there. But there is excess capacity in private schools we have right now, and as the program grows, more private schools will probably get started and be accredited. So that will grow too. The landscape will widen.
That's a great, great question, and one that gets frequently asked and that people need to know to understand this. So I'm really glad you asked that. She's addressed the phase 1, existing capacity. There is about 35% available capacity the first year in existing private schools. Now, one of the things about human behavior is inertia is a very powerful factor. So you're not really going to get 35% of the public school students leaving the first year. In any place that's ever, I'm shifting now to future capacity in a way, but wherever choice has been applied, you only get 3 to 5% of the people taking advantage of it the first year. And that sounds like, well, what's the point of the program? Okay, why? Well, it's like, well, in economics terms, this is called margins. How things work on the margins is what determines the direction. But I'm going to try to simplify that. Just because I'm an economist and a lawyer, so I don't talk like one. What it means is 3 to 5% of the people start leaving because there's a problem or because there's a better situation. Either way, the administrators pay attention to that because their budget is leaving now. Why are you leaving? This better school exists. They have every child in their school reading at or above grade level. Half of yours are below grade level. I don't know how they do it, but I think I'm going to go over there. And what happens is that puts pressure on the school that's losing students to change its behavior. And it figures out what's wrong before the parents even know what's wrong. This is how freedom and the cooperation model work as opposed to the compulsion model that we use now. And I'm going to say this, step back. I was on the open enrollment charter school program evaluation for the state of Texas. This was the question about charters. We now have about 200 or more charter schools in the state. Do you know the exact number?
Well, there are 215 capped for the charter, but there are more schools.
Right.
That's for the charter itself.
We have 215 brand new schools that never existed because we opened up school choice. And I told the legislature at the time, if you just allow schools to open, people will open schools because they know they can be funded because the money will follow the child. And sure enough, there's already 215 charters allowed. Many of them have multiple campuses. So hundreds of new schools opened up without a bond issue, without a public vote, because good teachers, educators saw the need and said, I can do a better job, and opened up a new school. So everywhere that choice has been adopted, including Texas with the charter schools, you see an expansion of the market. More schools exist. And what happens to the low tier? They either improve internally because the local management sees the problem and now responds, or if they are so bad that even when everyone's leaving, they don't change, then people find but it's not even like they get shut down. It's like people just eventually figure out there are better places to go. And that's why, as the superintendent said, why African American achievement is going up in these places. KIPP Academy here has 40,000 students on its single waiting list. The IDEA charters have people on the waiting list. People are begging to get in because the money will now follow. The waiting lists are not quite as big probably for private schools because you got to come up with $5,000 or $6,000 of your own money to get in. So not as many people are eligible. But once every citizen can get in, then the list grows and the number of school expands and the kind of school expands. I believe, let's talk about African Americans. I believe that you need a special kind of school to meet the unique needs, say, of African American male children. And that's a good focus to have, created by people who love them and want to meet those needs. There may be Hispanic schools that need to be done. There are special needs schools that be created. One of the reasons IDEA works, for example, is their school day is longer. It starts, and I may be a little bit wrong on the exact times, but it kind of like goes from 6 to 6. So if you're a working mom or something, you can put her in there. Well, that requires some teachers to work a little bit harder, but there are people who want to do that because they see all of the children succeeding, and over 95% of them going on to college or careers. It's amazing what they can do when schools specialize. So not one size does not fit all, but there should be a school for every child to go to. And that is why we do need public education, and we need a variety, like you said, many kinds of private schools. When you break the monopoly, choice explodes and new schools are created. That's the answer.
Thank you for explaining. I'm in the back. There you go. Comparing economics to education, because it's a free marketplace, and then let the market drive demand. So I like that analogy. My question is, special needs support and funding is harbored in the public schools, but they don't necessarily do a good job with it. What are private schools doing, and what are the options that you see to get the funding and the support over to the private area?
Well, private school, special needs students do get extra funding, but not enough extra funding through the public schools. And there's some families and children that have had terrible experiences in public schools. There are incredible private schools that serve special needs students. In fact, Representative Turner, who you mentioned on your slide, came and visited Rawson Saunders School in Austin about, I think, last month, and it's a school for children with dyslexia. Only children with dyslexia go to this school, and it changes their lives. We walked into a meeting, and the head of school shared a letter from a student who said that he was considering committing suicide because he just couldn't keep up in school. He felt like he was worthless. He got to Rawson Saunders, found a community of people who were just like him, bright, incredible kids who just needed a new way to learn how to read, and he would never contemplate suicide. It was just, we were all crying in that meeting. And so there aren't enough private schools because it is very expensive to educate a special needs child. Many of them do well simply in the smaller classroom environment that's characteristic of a private school. But there are some other needs that need to be funded as well. And I will mention this is not our platform, but we're in the whole choice umbrella, and Representative Turner, as part of that visit, is going to sponsor a bill for an ESA, an education savings account for special needs students. And that's sort of like the taxpayer savings grant that they have it in Arizona. It's sort of a credit card that you get if you have a child with special needs, and you can spend it on therapy or private school or tutoring or many other options. So that's in the school choice landscape. It's not part of our particular bill that we're pushing for, but it's a great idea. And Representative Turner's really serious about that.
That's right. And I'll just be brief. A lot of the choice programs around the country are for special needs students, scholarships for them, and we already pay a little bit more for them, so that money usually follows them too. And even if it's not quite enough money, it still adds to the array of things a special needs parent has. If the public school works, great, keep them there. And this just gives you something else to try. So it's really an addition to the whole educational banquet. A lot of questions, yes.
I don't have a question, I have a statement. There are many public schools that are quite supportive and quite educational toward the needs of special ed kids, okay? And there are private schools where the teachers are not trained to teach these kids. Mm-hmm. Basically, no matter if you're trained or untrained, what you have to have is an understanding of the child's needs. Mm-hmm. You have to know that, and you have to be able to support the parents, because sometimes the parents don't understand. But the biggest thing is, in the private schools and in the charter schools, teachers are not trained sufficiently to teach special needs kids.
And I hope I said, if the public school does a good job, then keep them there, because there are many. And depending on the severity of the need and the need for training, that may be the only place that can do it.
No, I'm not saying that's the only place that can do it, because like you said, there are ups and downs in that. But I also know from personal experience, the schools that I have been around, there are teachers who are not trained in special ed. They need to get trained. Mm-hmm. They're trained in other things.
Mm-hmm.
Over here or back there?
Good morning, and thank you for coming. 3 questions. First, what can we do as the people who are assembled here to join forces with you?
Just understanding the issue. So on our website, texasprivateschools.org, following on Facebook and Twitter, just to keep up with the issue and talk to your community about it. The biggest hurdle I have seen is people not understanding what we're talking about, especially the tax credit scholarship bill. And I didn't get into all the nitty-gritty because I don't want you to fall asleep. But once they understand what we're talking about, even the people that were fighting the hardest, we said, oh, well, that might work. And so just talking to people, understanding the issues, really helping people feel passionately about this.
And Peter says, if you signed up outside, you're going to get on the mailing list for this type of information. If you don't want to, strike your name off the list. And if you didn't, be sure and sign before you leave. So that's how you can get involved the first step, and we'll just send you more information.
And run for office.
And go to Austin. My wife says, be willing to go to Austin during the legislative session. You might have to take a day off or a half a day or something to go. Now, you can also do it with your representative now rather than just the day. And again, regardless of which party you are, this is a nonpartisan issue. There are Democrats who support school choice, there are Republicans who support school choice, and there are people in both parties that oppose it. So it's not just a party issue, but you should ask your representative where they stand on the issue. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just state the facts on where the top of the tickets stand. Greg Abbott is for school choice. I have not heard where Wendy Davis stands on the issue, but I would not expect her to be for it because there is stronger Democratic Party opposition than in the Republican Party. Dan Patrick is extremely for school choice and is going to campaign in minority neighborhoods to say, I don't want your children trapped in what may be low-performing public schools. If they're good, they're good. But if they're bad, I want you to be able to take your share of the money to the school of your choice. He's planning to campaign on it strongly for lieutenant governor. Letisa Vandepute, who is a good friend of mine, I work with her a lot on anti-human trafficking, has sent her children to private school, but she opposes private school choice. So at the top of the ticket, that's just where those two stand. But that's easier to find. You need to talk to your representatives. And then, even if they say that now, if they hear from enough people in Texas that the people want school choice, it'll change regardless of which party it is. And like I said, there are people in both parties who are for and against it. So it's not just a party issue. It really is not.
It's also an urban and rural issue. Many rural legislators, there aren't many private schools in rural areas, so they don't feel the need or don't really have to take that on. Urban legislators tend to have more failing schools or have families that are worried about that. And so they, of both parties, are more willing to talk about it. But look on the committees, the ed committees, and see if you know if your representative is on there, or talk to me. That's my job, to be in there.
And there were some votes in the last session of the legislature that if you signed up today, we'll send you the list of how they voted for or against it in the last legislature. They may or may not vote the same way, but that's pretty good evidence. If they were for you, then you want to say thank you. If they were against you, say why, and would you come over to our side? Well, we'll send you that list.
Second question, just in simplest terms. So private school funding is less expensive than public school funding. What resource can a parent go to today to tap into getting that money so that they can go to a private school?
No, there is no private school funding right now. What we're talking about will be the first time it would ever happen in Texas. Private schools operate on their own. They're tuition driven. Now, families can get individual scholarships to private schools. They apply to the school, but that's money raised by the school. There's no public money going to private schools right now.
And where does the TEA stand on this right now?
Ooh.
Well,
Pointed
TEA
question.
is a government agency, so it probably won't take an official position. I think Michael Williams, the Commissioner of Education, would be for school choice. He has been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But he will, as the current commissioner, he'd say, I'll do whatever the legislature wants me to do. So TEA itself is not a problem. or a player one way or the other in a sense. They probably stay neutral. If they support charter schools, they support public schools. If private schools are included, they'll say, fine with us, we just do whatever you tell us to do, we'll follow the law.
Question in the back.
Hello, first of all, I would like to express appreciation for your time. We're really glad that you're here. My question is, what is your main obstacle in getting the information out? Because that appears to be the gap. I think if more people know the benefits of this, I think that the people would stand up and vote these issues in. Is it more like the political bureaucracy, or is it more of financing? You need more financing to allow you to get this information out to the people.
Well, the opposition has been so strong for so long. This is my understanding. Again, I haven't been through a legislative session yet. January 2015 will be my trial by fire. But there are many, many teacher groups and really well-funded groups that are in total opposition to anything even like this. I was sitting outside of a hearing a couple months ago, and the agenda had nothing to do with school choice. I was just there to meet people and see who was there. And one of the lobbyists came out and he said, well, as long as they're not talking about vouchers. And I thought, vouchers is not even on the agenda. And it's an emotional trigger that I am trying to brace myself for in January. So I don't know what else we can do besides just keep talking.
And the other problem is they have taxpayer funding to support them. There's the Go Public campaign here, supported by your tax dollars. However, what we need to do is just organize among parents. That's what Peter Onofre is going to be trying to do. We are getting organized. The idea is out there. Now we need to get people who are passionately committed to it. And that's just social media, word of mouth, and emails. So think about July 17th, joining us from 10 to 3. Peter will send out more information about that. And if we have your emails, we'll send you specific information about that. You will get information from us if you've signed up. And this will be the last question then.
Here, real quick, Alan, for Pastor Jermaine, if you're going to notice that this year in Georgia, you got the Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass Academy, which they're starting a series of private and charter schools to take black males out of public and private schools, and they're going to be all black male schools. So you're going to start seeing this go around the country where they're trying to help black males. So it's the Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass Academy. The first one's going to be in Georgia this year. Also, with special needs children. One of the reasons why it's difficult to educate children, special needs children in private schools, is you're going to have to pay for a special needs child or a teacher for that child. Many of the children are going into mainstream classrooms, and that child needs special attention. So I understand what you're saying about they're not trained, but they're immersed in a classroom with the regular children where those children need a little bit more special needs. But there is a Ewing Academy here in San Antonio, and it is designed to deal with special needs children, and it has a 1-to-1 ratio. So when you do have special needs schools that are private, not only do they 4 or 5 kids in one room, there is a school right here in San Antonio that has a 1-to-1 ratio. They have one teacher trained and certified to deal with that one child. So when you put them in a private school environment, you even get better treatment. So but not every student is going to leave public school. So you can't decimate and destroy it. We have to fight for the rights of all children. I don't understand how, I feel like I need to just run for office or something, because somebody needs to fight for the rights of children.
Yes.
And I'm frustrated. So what I want to know, Alan, is what can administrators do in each public and private school? And also, is there a forum where public school administrators and private school administrators can come together and fight for the rights of children?
Yes. Every administrator of a private school ought to be having a forum like this. Every parent of a child in private school ought to be on
the database, which we eventually need about 200 to 300,000 names, so that when we do call you and say it's time to call your legislature, people can respond. It's not like you have to do this every day of your life, but if we band together and everybody does their part, then we can be successful. But it is time to organize and to be together on this. And the private administrators can give those, get everybody signed up. And that's what we need to do. We need to be united. We need to be working. Our motto is school choice for all. And we'll get everything we can get every session of the legislature until we've achieved